Good afternoon. This afternoon, we are going to discuss the book A Forgotten Ambassador in Cairo by N.S. Vinodh. And to discuss the book, we are joined by a very distinguished panel of speakers, Ms.Narayani Mahil, Dr. Uday Balakrishnan, the author, Mr. N.S. Vinodh, and Ms. Himanjali Sarkar, who is going to moderate. It's my privilege to introduce the moderator of this session, Himanjali. She's an editor, author, and a writer. Her children's and young adults' books include the stupendous time-telling Dog and Talking of Muskan, which were shortlisted for the Crossword Book Award. Mrs. C remembers her first novel for adults won her the Fiki Publishing Award for Upcoming Author of the Year in 2018. Apart from teaching literature at the University of Indianapolis for a couple of semesters, she's been an editor with several publishing houses in New Delhi for over 15 years. She's currently editorial director at the Seaman & Schuster, India. Ms. Himanjali Shankar, I now request you to take the discussions forward. Himanjali.
Thank you, Usha, and welcome everyone to what promises to be a wonderful webinar organized by India International Center. Thank you, IIC, for doing this for a book that we at Simon & Schuster India are very proud and happy to have published. N.S. Vinodh's wonderfully well-researched and well-written biography of Syud Hossain, a forgotten ambassador in Cairo. We have the author N.S. Vinodh with us. I'll introduce him first and ask him to say a few words. So Vinodh had his early education in Bangalore and thereafter obtained his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from IIT Madras and then an MBA from IIM Lucknow. In a corporate career spanning 25 years, he has held senior positions in the field of corporate real estate with leading multinational financial service companies such as ANZ, Greenlace Bank, HSBC, and Fidelity Investments. He opted for early retirement to start his own real estate company in Bangalore as well as to pursue his interest in traveling, history, and writing. So over to you, Vinodh. We'd like you to tell us a little more about, to tell us about the book and thank you.
Thank you, Himanjali, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to the other panelists who have taken their time off to be with me today. Thank you so much. So the question I'm usually asked is, how did I get to write this book? Why Syud Hossain, who's probably not at all known in the field of Indian history or whatever. So it all began when we went on a family holiday to Cairo in 2018. And we had just finished a visit to the pyramids, and the guide said, look, since you're from India, I'll show you something which may be of interest to you. And he took me to this tomb, which is in the City of the Dead. And it was a beautiful, large marble tomb, but it was very badly kept, very badly maintained with debris and garbage strewn around. And the plaque said that here lies Dr. Syud Hossain, the first Indian ambassador to Egypt. I had read a little about him through, books of M.O. Mathai and so on, but I was so surprised that this man was actually buried in Cairo and not in India, and his tomb was so badly maintained. So I wanted to actually write a Facebook post on this. That's how the whole thing began. But when I began to research a little more about this person, I found his life so fascinating and his personality so interesting, and his involvement in various facets of India's history at that time, right from the Khilafat movement to Jallianwala Bagh, either directly or peripherally, being Motilal Nehru's editor. States got involved in the history of the Indian immigration to the United States, participated in a lot of those events and movements in the US, came back to India, was there when Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated. So his career was fascinating. And the surprising thing was that he was hardly ever known. So that actually took me on this journey to write about him. And while the book is primarily about him, I couldn't divest his life from the main events that he participated in. So it's also, in a way, a short history of the Indian immigration to the United States and a brief biography of some of those leading personalities who are involved in that struggle. Both the Indian independence struggle in the US as well as the fight for Indian citizenship in the US. So that actually is what resulted in this book, and that's why I have titled it The Life and Times of Syed Hossain. It is not just his life, but also the times that he lived in. So with that, I will let Himanjali take over and let the other speakers take on from there.
Thank you, Vinodh. Actually, that's really very interesting. And I love the original, I mean, the story of how it originated with just a family vacation and a Facebook post. So it literally sounds like almost random, but of course it was meant to be that sort of thing. So, so we'll, I'd like to now introduce our next, or rather the panelist, Ms. Narayani Mahil. And Narayani Mahil is a corporate communications professional with over 30 years of experience in the oil and gas industry. She has had a history of significant industry achievements while heading communications in India's biggest oil and gas explorer, ONGC, and the global energy company, BP. She co-founded TIL2. Am I saying that right, Narayani?
Absolutely. It's Tilly, which is Tell It Like It Is.
Okay, so I wasn't sure exactly. Okay, Tilly India, which is a professional independent specialist company for corporate communication and content generation. Her journey in communication started from being a journalist, a reporter covering the city beat in Bangalore. Her latest foray is in scripting for web series in OTT platforms. Okay, that's very interesting. She strongly feels that the more the communication medium changes, the more the human values reflected by them remains the same. I'm going to ask you what you to elaborate on that later. But okay, now for now, I'd like to hear you say a few words about this book.
So before I go to the book, I would like to tell you that I and Vinodh have known each other for 4 decades. So when we were I was a cub reporter, and I think, Vinodh, you were writing letters to the editor then. In a little known newspaper in Bangalore. And I think there was no way then that I would have ever thought Vinodh had a book in him. But it was such a pleasant surprise. And I'm so proud of him, because this book was one book which I read in one sitting. It kind of drew me in right from the beginning. And what really amazed me is the amount of research he has done on this book. It's an extensive, research, archival sources, interviews, and it's such a comprehensive biography of a forgotten, celebrated freedom fighter and a great intellectual. So, a person who championed Mahatma Gandhi's ideals, and actually, in one way, he was such an eloquent advocate of Mahatma Gandhi. And somewhere, I feel, how come we forgot him? Because he was one person who championed Mahatma Gandhi in the US. And that's how I kind of, when I was reading this book, and like Vinodh said, it's also about the times that we lived in those days, from when the freedom struggle was at zenith. And this was a person, a very suave, incredibly charming. And like there is a mention of, the fact that he loved his cognac, and he loved his, actually he used to, be a bit of a charmer with the ladies, and also was very proud of his dimples and his hairstyle and the way he conducted himself. And right through the book, you got this feeling that here's a person who needs more exploration, who needs more of your, who needs more of your time to understand, and also to figure out how important he was to the entire freedom struggle. So when we're looking at this book and this journey and the growth of Syed Hossain, his own self-discovery, especially the influence that he wielded in the US, some of the groundbreaking work that he did for India's freedom struggle and positioning it in the US, I would say in my remarks, I'll touch on about three observations, and I would like to read about two quotations from the book, not large ones, but just small ones too, which really impressed me because of a certain thought that came out in those quotations. And I will, of course, leave a question for Vinodh to answer, but more of that later. So here is this charming gentleman, and as I mentioned earlier, because it kept coming, I think there was a reference of it in M.O. Matai's very acerbic mention of him as a, what was it? He said he even drank his cognac in the morning or some such thing like that. And he was a rolling stone. He used to breeze from one hotel room to another. That in itself, in those times when people had such solid homesteads, and here was this man who lived out of suitcases, so much so that when he died, his memorabilia was limited to, I think, one briefcase and two suitcases. But the priceless amount of correspondence which he had exchanged at that time with most of the world leaders, especially the ones who were interested in India's freedom struggle. That in itself is something that takes us. It gives us a feeling of awe. Actually, how is this man who was so erudite and who actually called a spade, and still we don't know about him? It's this constant refrain that comes to my mind. I wish I had at least one mention of it in some textbook that I had read, a history book. And it's, I think, in the 75th year of Indian independence, here is something that we can actually do about these forgotten people who were equally who equally played a great role in the freedom struggle. We could kind of revisit their lives, and that's for somebody who's listening in or who's reading the book from the government to think about. So the observations that I would also like to make is his relationship with Sarojini Naidu, for example. There's a poignant story out there, a poignant story of a very strong attachment, at the same time a lot of sacrifice, self-control. And I think we know that one point of time says about like a challenge. He says in the book that she had an alliance with somebody called Syud in her university days. So she, Vinod's challenge is, my Syud was closer to Sarojini Naidu than your Syud. And that in itself is a kind of an episode in his life, which I think we need to research more about. They parted ways, how poignantly, just 5 days apart. In death also, they were so close to each other. So we need more exploration, I thought, while I was reading the book. These are the kind of things that came up to that kept coming. It was a constant refrain. And all the multiple discussions that went on. For example, if you look at Taraknath Das and Syed Hussain, they had their works, their speeches, and they were people who kind of denounced partition. We have not heard of too many of those voices, and not because it's of that great relevance, because we have two vibrant countries and we don't need to go back and visit that, but at least we will get to know from these collection of voices, including the one that the complete writings that have been displayed in the Voice of India, which was the leading journal at that point of time coming out from America. So if we have if we have anything as a tribute, if we want to do something in our 75th year of independence, I strongly feel that these are the discussions and writings and correspondence that needs to be highlighted even further. And our third observation is on all, I must compliment you, Vinodh. Each of those characters that you have, very picturesque characters that you have talked about, are a gem. For example, your Sardar J.J. Singh, and I think his Krishan Lal, Sri Dharani, and Haridas Mazumdar. Each one of them, if you look at their contributions, they fought with their resources, everything they had with them for the glory of India. They kind of they believed in India and they believed in freedom struggle, and this is something that we really, really have to revisit. So I'm hoping that this is just the beginning. This book is just the beginning, and I know Vinodh. I have chatted with him on this. Uh, if it was just a Facebook post, how much we would have lost. And it's thanks to you and your diligence that you went and researched, and you dug out all these unique personalities in your long journey in finding Syed Hussain. And each of these, you know, their lives is a fascinating chronicle. Actually, you know, if you look at pre-independent India in one sitting, if you want to hear about every movement that happened along with, because this narrative is about the times of Syed Hussein, we get to know about all of them. And I can tell you for sure that if I had one piece from this book to revisit again and again, that is the letter to Churchill. I think it's one of those it's one letter that can be read multiple times, and it can kind of, you can savor the penmanship, the oratory virtually in that, and it needs a larger tribute. It should be part of our history books. This is something that I really feel, if you know, like we mentioned, Vinodh, in our chats, if there is something that Shashi Tharoor did for the glory of India, it was his Oxford lecture. And if I look at that and I look at this letter to Churchill, which is written by Syed Hussein, I think they compare in the same. You can compare them in the same breath. So one of the first quotations that I would like to read out. I mean, these are not very important. I wouldn't say they're very you know soul-searching quotations, but what I want to give you the context is that it kind of is a gentle reminder to all of us on how the media shaped the freedom struggle, the honesty of the journalist. So, in this, we are talking about, in the book, Nehru made a bid for the control of the paper, lost, and resigned from the board of the leader. The leader was, the leader is the newspaper that we're talking about. And what did it do? It left Chintamani as the undisputed boss of the publication till the latter's death in July 1941. It's that in itself, that those lines itself tell you how Chintamani must have struggled, but overcome Nehru's bid, and how Nehru at that time is the tallest leader of the freedom struggle, but still Chintamani held his own. Chintamani epitomized the ideal of the incorruptible and the independent editor, and he quotes Vinodh that he was once described as the Pope of Indian journalism. When I read that, and I was just thinking, here is somebody who must have really struggled at that point of time, because he was he was virtually arguing against the tallest leader of Indian independence. And still he managed to get his own way, and his editorial view prevailed in the leader. The second is, of course, something that I just love, because of the fact that, it's almost like Syed Hussein cajoling Jinnah in a very few simple lines. He almost put him in his place. And he writes in this letter to him, "Your notion that I have gone over to the enemy is pure fantasy. It is true that I am not at all convinced of the feasibility of Pakistan, or that even if it were to materialize, it would in the long run be good for Muslims or India as a whole. And I have said so publicly. However, a difference of opinion on a large public question is not the point. The point, so far as I'm concerned, is that even when you become president of Pakistan, I hope you will remember to be a gentleman." So with these two quotations, and I think the last one, which of course, Himanjali, as we discussed, I will leave that question to our next round of discussions. So I would suggest to you that, Vinodh, you have more books in you. And whether you go traveling and you write travelogues, but I think there is that keen researcher and the seeker of truth in you that will really help all of us readers to understand more about certain characters. And I'm just eagerly waiting for your next visit abroad.
Yeah. Thank you, Narayani. That was actually, it's very, especially for those who haven't read the book, I think it's kind of really nice the way you've sort of highlighted or drawn attention to so many of the interesting characters and events in the book. So yeah, I hope it sort of gets more people interested in Syed Hussein, which is, I guess, the whole idea of what we are doing. So next, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Uday Balakrishnan, a former officer of the Indian Postal Service, newspaper columnist, and now a teacher. He retired from the Government of India in 2010 as member, Postal Services Board and Chairman, Investment Board, Postal Life Insurance Fund. Dr. Balakrishnan's academic interests include modern history and public policy. He has been a visiting fellow at the National Institute of Advanced Study, Bangalore, and the Central European University, Budapest, and visiting faculty at the Center for Contemporary Studies, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where he also teaches public policy and contemporary history. That's very impressive list of achievements, and I'd like to ask Dr. Balakrishnan to address us now and share his thoughts about the book.
Thank you very much, Himanjali. It's a pleasure to be here. And the first time I heard about the book, I thought, oh my God, here we go again. Somebody has picked up some character from somewhere and brought him up and just put it out in a book. And I looked again and I started reading a little. And just like Narayani said, I didn't read it at one sitting, I read it at 2 sittings. So it really took me in. You know, the book was so overwhelming for 2 reasons. One, it is extremely objective, and he doesn't quite make a point which is his own. Rather, he enables us to see an age and a time and a person in his period and in the milieu that he was in. So we have Syud Hossain, a magnificent character coming from a very distinguished family and not doing academically very well at all, which is fantastic because later on, he went on to teach in a very good university in the United States on invitation, in fact. He was a fantastic editor, writing in the best newspapers of his time. And we also have the fact that he was editor of 3 journals in 3 continents, which makes that unique. And altogether, we have a personality who's incredible. But let us talk about his age. This book itself is set in a fantastic canvas. It's global in its reach. And how is it global? Now, number one, we see it's in the backdrop of the First World War. The world has just come out of it. Gandhi feels very frustrated and let down by the British because, in fact, he had canvassed for the British and for the war throughout that period. And suddenly you have the Roll attack. Suddenly you have the British literally telling you, go to hell, we are not going to give you your freedom. In fact, we're going to be very draconian with you. Now, in that background, we also have a tremendous event coming up for us in the sense that the freedom struggle had taken a distinctly different turn. Now, the idea was that we didn't want just freedom from the British within a British dominion. We wanted freedom altogether. I mean, we didn't want to be with the British at all in any capacity above us. So we have a canvas which is large, but then this is also a big love story, which people miss out. And that is between Vijay Lakshmi Pandit and him. It was a brief marriage, a Muslim marriage at that, and Gandhi is supposed to have broken it. And he did break it, in fact, why suppose? And and helped Vijay Lakshmi Pandit literally come out of it and live within it. Now, at no stage, it's a grand love story in the sense that it continues throughout Vijay Lakshmi's lifetime. And whenever she goes, she visits the grave, she talks about him. But in a sense, both made each other. And this long lecture tour that she undertook in the United States is largely a creation of, in fact, Syud made her, and in fact, arranged the meetings, arranged the opportunities for her to speak to the United States. Now, apart from that, there is a bigger message in this whole book that in a globalized world, people listen to others. That however flawed democracies come out of their difficulties and do the right thing. The United States, Canada, all were extremely white countries, allowing only whites in, and over a period of time, they changed. And they also became very liberal in admitting people of non-Caucasian races. So in the sense that the Ghadar movement, the original challenge to immigrants there was gradually eased until Indians form a very distinctly prosperous, educated community in the United States now. So it's an incredible book on that front, but it's also a struggle of Indian immigrants, which I didn't quite figure out why people who are just going to immigrate there were figuring in this book. But then I understand that, yes, they were wanting a better life, and why not move around the world? Now, when it comes, and another aspect is, we have Gandhi. Gandhi is a very misunderstood character. Did he break this marriage? And is he a love jihadist, as one of the reviews says he was? No, I don't think so, because in his age and time, Gandhi had a constituency to contend with. He had, his entire support base was Hindu. If he didn't have that support base, he was not a Gandhi, he was not a leader. And he had to keep it intact, and also make sure that the Hindus were not so much against a secular state which would be accommodating the Muslims in a big capacity. As it is, you know that the electorate had been split. Muslims had got their own electorate from 1909 onwards. So with all these things going, how would Gandhi have reacted to, how would Gandhi or anybody in India, any Hindu would have reacted to a marriage between the most prominent family in the freedom struggle, their daughter marrying a Muslim in a Muslim ceremony? It was not very easy on anybody. So I think Gandhi did right at that time, but at the same time, he didn't curb Syed. He recognized his capabilities. They were not in India, he realized, and sent him off to the United States, where he made a big name sent him off to the West, to England, and then to the United States, and made a big name for himself. He was a spectacular speaker. He was a very persuasive one. And I think America rallied behind us. It's not as if Roosevelt suddenly came and told Churchill, be fair to Indians. There was a background to it. And this is the background that comes out in this book. It is a fantastic book. And I think it tells us a lot of micro histories and micro stories, which together add up to a very interesting and very beautiful freedom struggle, the best of its kind the world has ever known. I mean, it's not one which caused a huge lot of deaths. It didn't cause, of course, we had partition, that's another matter. But throughout the struggle, it was not a question of freedom just coming to us just like that. It was a struggle which was waged not just in India, but overseas. And that is something which we need to recognize. And Vinodh has brought that out beautifully. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Balakrishnan. That was really very interesting. And again, I think it gives a lot of context to the book, which we can, of course, take this up and discuss all of this a little more in a bit. Now, I'd like to have my turn. And I would love to talk a little about this book too. And, we published this quite a few months back. And since it's received, since publication, it's received great reviews. It's been longlisted and shortlisted for awards. And it's having a great journey, of which we as publishers are also very proud. So I thought I would share a little about the publishing process, or the relationship that we've had with this book as publishers. So I remember when Vinodh's agent, Priya Duraswamy, she sent us the proposal, it immediately caught our attention. To begin with, possibly because, as far as reading trends go, in the last few years, readers seem to be interested in reading memoirs and biographies. Its popularity as a genre has soared. And so this book about a lesser known figure from the time of the independence movement, we felt it had a lot of potential. And also I have to say the title, A Forgotten Ambassador in Cairo, is very evocative. Often as publishers, we spend many months trying to come up with the right title. But this manuscript, it just came with the title that was perfect. Of course, this was our initial response. Things which caught our attention immediately. But after this came, of course, the most important part, really, the reading of the manuscript. And, that's a stage at which we as publishers decide if we are going to acquire a book. And reading this, both Shayantan, who was the commissioning editor for this book, and we immediately agreed that this was such good writing. It was engaging, the stories, the characters, they caught our interest immediately. And we could also see what a deeply researched book this was, and we were very sure we wanted to publish it. And for Dr. Balakrishnan and Narayani have spoken at length about this book, and you all can see why that would be the case. So just sharing some thoughts. In many ways, what one could say is the job of a biography is really to weave a narrative the way a novel does, and it's the same, it's the same thing. You're both trying to tell stories. And that's what Vinodh does very competently in this book. He paints a portrait of a character of Syed Hossain weaving this complicated tapestry around his life and times, something that requires enormous skill from any writer. So, like a biography is not just about listing down major life events, it's about getting an insight into the worldview of the person, the events that shape them. And this book also, as you all would have gathered by now, this book also gives a lot of historical information, not in a way that's dry or textbookish. It's a complete picture of the man, and an intelligent, unusual man of those times, his strengths, his weaknesses, and it just basically tells the story as it was. In fact, the way Syud Hussain is introduced in the beginning itself, it captures one's imagination. This boy born in Calcutta, whose lineage could be traced back to Persia, whose ancestors were part of the Mughal court. And I must admit, as I think even Narayani said, I also personally didn't really know of Syud Hussain till I read this book. And it was such a surprise to see how very connected he was to the independence movement from the start. And again, this is something that Dr. Balakrishnan spoke about. But in the first part of the book, one of my favorite stories is set in 1919, when Motilal Nehru and Jawaharlal Nehru, they start this newspaper, The Independent, in order to counter the colonial narrative. And Syud Hussain was appointed as its editor. And in fact, after the first issue was published, Gandhi wrote to him, congratulating him for the same. But again, as this particular story gets more, what should I say, captivating, when we get to know that during this time, as he was working as the editor for this newspaper, a romance started brewing between a young, then unmarried Vijay Lakshmi Pandit and the dashing Syud Hussain, which the Nehrus didn't approve of, which led to a lot of drama with Vijay Lakshmi Pandit and Syud Hussain eloping. And then thereafter they were forced to break up, and it was only when Syud Hussain left for London that this scandal was sort of, what should I say, laid to rest. Dr. Balakrishnan actually put the story in context, in fact, a very interesting contemporary context, and he brings in Gandhi and love jihad, which is something we can actually discuss later. So as you all can see, the book is peppered with stories like this. It is, as I've already said, it's very skillfully written, and there's so much detailing that's fascinating. Snippets that capture the imagination. Another example was that which caught my fancy. It seems Syud Hussain was close friends with Khalil Gibran. It's a person I didn't expect to find in this book. So basically, one can see and sense how very immersed Vinodh must have been in the life of the man he was writing about. And the success of any book is really how many readers you can reel in. And this book does have so much that is exciting for a person reading it in our times in India, when we are still very taken with the early decades of the 20th century leading up to independence and thereafter. So Vinodh very deftly intertwines with Syud Hussain's story the politics, not just in India, but in so many parts of the world at that time. As we've been pointing out, the historical backdrop is rich and engrossing. And of course, and Syud Hussain did have a really colorful life, lots of love affairs. And the main focus of this biography is his life itself, which has so much to offer in terms of his involvement as an intelligent, thoughtful man of those times in politics, and in a larger sense, his contribution towards making history, really. So I'd like to conclude by saying I'm very happy to have been a part of the publication and success of this book. And I hope it has a long shelf life and is read by more and more people. And now I'd like to circle back to Narayani, Mahil, and Dr. Balakrishnan and ask them, and they both promised questions to Vinodh. So let's ask them if there's anything they would like to add, and what other questions they would like to ask Vinodh.
I know I'm a bit wary because when you talk about love jihad and nationalism, which is how that reviewer put it, Uday, and it was so unfortunate that that's just about 10% of the book. But still, that's something that also made me wonder. And this is in the context of Vinodh having dedicated his book to the memory and to the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi. So Vinodh, for you, I would like to know, while you were researching and writing this book, what aspect of Mahatma Gandhi's life and struggle, was revealed to you? Any new aspect, a nuance, or something that you think you didn't know before and came as a surprise to you? And connected to that is the fact that in some way they didn't want Syed Hussein in India, and they kind of, was it strategized to move him as the representative of India to the US? Because if you look at the aura of Mahatma Gandhi in the US, I think we owe most of it to what people like Syed Hussein had been uh, talking about, lecturing, and conveying to the people of America. So in that way, maybe because it was a continent that didn't know much about the freedom struggle till then, and maybe it was a strategy and a decision taken to send Syed because he was such a brilliant orator, and it was unfortunate that it started because of, I mean, he was moved out of India basically like a deportation because of his affair with, I think she wasn't Vijay Lakshmi then, she was Sarup Kumari. So, what are your views on that, in the sense that what did you know of Mahatma Gandhi additionally, and do you think there was a strategy behind this?
So what came across to me very strongly was the amount of loyalty that Gandhi could command from his followers. And I'll give you 3 instances, all referring to Syed Hussein. So in the first event, Syed Hussein was obviously much in love with Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, Swarup Nehru, got married, but Gandhi ji stepped in and said, no, you're not getting married, I'm going to break it up. Maybe he had a larger reason to do that, but nonetheless he did that. So after this breakup, Syed Hussein was sent to England as part of the Khilafat movement delegation. And after that, he became a joint editor of this publication called India, which was published by the British Committee of the Indian National Congress. Now, this committee had been in existence for over 30, 40 years, and so was this publication. However, Gandhi felt that this publication nor the committee was serving its purpose, and therefore he advised that both the committee and the publication be wound up. Now, because of that, Syed Hussein lost his job, and which was the reason why he had to go to the United States. Now, both these cases actually directly affected Syed Hussein. However, what is notable is that Syed Hussein continued to be loyal to Gandhi, and Gandhi continued to have a huge amount of affection for Syed. So when Syed Hussein started his publication, The New Orient in the US, Gandhiji wrote a very nice message to him and continued to shower his affection on him. When Syed Hussein visited India in 1937, Gandhi met him. 47 when Syed Hussein came back. So what I found strange was that despite these personal setbacks that Syed Hussein could directly attribute to Gandhi, the amount of loyalty and affection that Syed and Gandhi had for each other was remarkable. There was no personal rancor in this. Maybe there was a larger cause that sort of forced them to take these decisions, but that did not affect their personal relationship. And the same holds good with Jawaharlal Nehru also. I mean, obviously he didn't want his sister to get married to Syed Hussein at that time, but later, recognizing Syed's talent, he made him the first ambassador, Indian ambassador to Egypt. So that is what is very remarkable in this, or at least the people of those times, that they were able to put their personal differences aside for the larger cause. Does that answer your question, Narayani?
Anything new that you learned about? Am I mute?
No, I think, yeah, I can hear you. So,
Yes. Anything new?
Yeah, particularly new was the article which Gandhi wrote in Young India soon after Syed Hussein and Vijay Lakshmi were asked to split. Gandhi made plain his views that he did not support an inter-religion marriage. And that is what came as a surprise. The vehemence and the clarity with which he wrote this came as a surprise to me. Normally, you would not expect that kind of a statement from Gandhi, But there it was in black and white that he did not support it. That came as a surprise.
I was just thinking that the times we are living in, of course, that's something a little, but almost dangerous for us to discuss too much. But the fact is, this is 100 years back almost, and we are expected to have moved forward. So, putting it in the context of how far back it was, maybe in those days it made sense because that's how, that's the way the politics was moving at that time. And there was all the, like, of course, this is just before partition and all that went wrong. But I think one can't also hold Gandhi to this in the sense of not the way we can today. Like something like this today would be, it is definitely objectionable. It's something that one should not say, one should not think, one should not be. I mean, it's dated. But I think it's okay sometimes that you do have to put something in the context of the times of when it occurred. Because I'm sure there's lots of things which we are saying, we are doing now, which won't be acceptable in the future. And of course, the point that Vinodh made about that there was no personal rancor despite this, that itself is something that we need to hold on to and see as something positive. Because and that's all. I mean, that's just what I was thinking as he was speaking about this. Narayani is been muted. Yeah, can you repeat yourself?
I said I was so impressed, Himanjali, with what Vinodh said about the fact that his loyalty was unquestioned.
Yeah.
And that it's all very nice to say, make a remark like that, but when you actually are living without any means of getting a job or having money to sustain your life, and still you have no rancor, that actually shows us that he held Gandhiji in such high esteem that he himself understood why the decision was taken. But then also in the book somewhere, I saw Sarojini Naidu. Why I like the relationship of Sarojini Naidu and Syed was because she used to she would give a very prosaic and a very a platonic kind of an explanation to their life by saying things like, I don't think they were very much into each other. In today's, if I had to say it in today's context, I would say they were not into each other that much, and the affair had fizzled out long ago. So that is why I was thinking about Sarojini Naidu in my observation, that there was a deep relationship there too, and maybe in some way he was her muse. He was the muse to Sarojini Naidu, because she sustained that relationship right till the end. And even he used to write very often to her daughters, and they were like almost family friends. So in that sense, I think Syed Hussain has a very big role to play in Sarojini Naidu's life too, which has been a little bit, we've kind of forgotten about that because of this more interesting Sarup Kumari Vijayalakshmi Pandit episode.
Yeah, totally. I mean, actually that's really very beautiful, that all these relationships and the depth in them. And so Dr. Balakrishnan, would you like to come in at this point?
Sure. Vinodh, I just have one or two interesting questions which I think are interesting. Why didn't Syed protest this breakup, even mildly, in the sense that, okay, why don't you give it a chance? Now, this is something which is a mystery to me, though I've read it in the book and it is implied in many ways by his conduct. But tell us a little about that, and I'll go to my next question after.
I don't know if I have that there was some kind of a sort of a discussion. Is I found that only in Vijayalakshmi's letter to Padmaja Naidu, where she mentions that Gandhi sat them both down and gave them a dressing down, and at some point Vijayalakshmi so wanted to laugh that she just ran out of the room. I'm sure Syed Hussain might have protested, but given that these three seem to have been the only parties to the discussion, and Vijayalakshmi didn't say anything more about it, neither did Gandhi and nor did Syed. So it is all a matter of conjecture. And conjecture is something that I didn't want to put in my book. I wanted statements from people who were actually there. So I did ask Nayantara Saigal when I met her. Nayantara is Vijayalakshmi's daughter. And her point was that, look, at that time, given the situation in the country, it would not have been advisable for a Hindu, especially the daughter of Motilal, to get married to Syed Hussain, a Muslim. She says, so therefore, all of them are on the same page, and Syed Hussain accepted the decision. Maybe he protested, but we don't know about it.
Though it's only a small part of the book, the romance is just an interesting and very relevant part of the book. But on the larger canvas, what really happened was, after this, Vijayalakshmi was also very close to him throughout. They met often, and she went to his grave, placed flowers on them, and she took every opportunity. So it's a huge a love affair spanning literally ages, decades. It's a fantastic one. I mean, it's a story which you can write about separately. But here again, there's a bigger story which I'm looking at in this. It is how democracies react in the context of today, what's happening in Afghanistan or anything anywhere else. We suddenly find that Syed is relocated in UK. There are a large number of Britishers who are on his side. And we go across to the United States, where there are a large number of Americans on his side. They come to his lectures. In fact, when the official delegation to the United Nations went there and he had a discussion with them, it was Syed who was feted and who was, when he came out, he was literally mobbed and carried out in a great style. Now, this sort of a thing is something which we don't really recognize, but you really brought that out very well. Was it intentional? Because here what happens is we are looking at a democracy meeting, an attempting democracy meeting, and at a democracy in action. With all its faults, these democracies also have the strength to come out of their deficiencies. So in a sense, your book is also an endorsement of a democratic way of life. Did you intend that at all? Or was it something which just came out?
I think it just, like I said, look, I was more a chronicler in this attempt. I was not an interpreter of events. The interpretation, I would leave it to scholars like you. So my intent was simply to place Syed Hussein's life in the context of his times and not to interpret his life or the events one way or another. So I guess it probably comes out that democracy is good, but that was certainly not the intent when I wrote it.
No, what I'm trying to say is democracy is self-correcting. It has eventually manages to get it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but the other question, the third one, and perhaps this is the last, I should give Narayani a chance also. You bring across some absolutely interesting characters, and they just flit. And one of them is this man Virendranath Chattopadhyay, Chatu, who was executed in one of the rare ones who got the honor of being executed by Stalin. Now, it is amazing. He is one, and then we have this lady Kamala, who is actually who came to India, founded a school, and Kamala, of course, was an adopted name of Elizabeth. Now, these are fantastic micro stories to tell us that we live in a globalized world, that there are people who come into our life, that's an Indian life, and we go into theirs also. We distinguish ourselves there, we achieve things there, and there have also been people who have achieved it here. Now, these are fantastic stories. I mean, and what I really appreciate how you integrate them, but I was wondering why you didn't bring more of this into this book. There are so many characters who moved into India and with whom Syed obviously would have reacted and would have engaged. Did you miss something there? I'm sorry,
that way,
it's a fantastic book. So I'm only asking you something beyond the book.
I mean, there were a number of other characters. I agree with you, but I wanted a connect with Syed Hussain to be on a much more, let us say, involved basis. So I sort of left out the characters who were peripheral to his life and concentrated on those with whom he had a much deeper relationship. I think that's how I would answer your question.
With Elizabeth, he had a deeper relationship. She was his secretary. And of course, you brought her out very well, by the way. I'm not saying that you sort of you disengaged her from the book. You brought her in and you left her off very neatly. I think that's a very nice way you've done it. But I was wondering if a little few more of these micro histories, because India, in this book, what I gathered, one of the important aspects you bring out in this book is that freedom movement just didn't happen because of one person. Yes, one person controlled it, but there was a huge amount of activity going on in a globalized world, and that was an intensely globalized world. And this is something which I really appreciate in this book. But one of the things which I would have thought you could have brought in a little more, and which is not being critical of the book, because I think it's fantastic and probably the best book I've read in the last year up to now. Why did you met him in a globalized setting? You went to his grave and went to his tomb in Cairo. So why did you not build on that a little more? How in contextualizing the Indian freedom struggle in that? It's a very tough question for you, because I can't expect you to do everything inside the book, but you do bring it out beautifully. But a little more expansion, or is it in the second book?
I was just going to say we should have a second book with all the micro histories and and the characters that have gone missing. Yeah.
I'll just mention one point. I think there is a question which make one point on this lady Kamala Nimkar. Her son B.V. Nimkar, Bon Nimkar, is the person I met in Fulton. He was an agricultural scientist, and he was about 88 years when I met him. He passed away last week, and I sort of a few days ago, in fact. And of course, his inputs to the book were very valuable for whatever he said on his mother. So I sort of want to mention that. I think there is one question that I would like to.
There's a question from Veena Ravikumar, and she says that this book is fascinating and it's definitely a must-read book, and she wanted to know more about Syed Hussein's how he advanced Indian independence abroad. I mean, if you could talk about that.
So I'll mention that briefly. Veena, thank you for the question. Syed Hussain reached the United States exactly 100 years ago. In fact, he landed in the US sometime in October of 1921. And then he spent the next 10 years traveling through every state in the US and giving almost about 500 to 600 lectures in cities big and small to propagate Gandhi's philosophy, to condemn British colonialism in India, and to tell the people, especially the American public, that Indian independence should be given and that America should support Indian independence. So, if at all Gandhi was made a household name in America during that decade, I would credit Syed Hussain largely with that. So this was one of the activities of speaking to the American public. Apart from that, he published a couple of magazines. He joined organizations to propagate this. He engaged in conversations or debates with British propagandists to counter them and tell them that India needed independence and was not content in being a sort of a colony of Britain. So he did a lot of this. And I think starting with 1921 till his departure from the US in 1946, he was one of those pillars of the Indian activist movement in the US.
Can we unmute Dr. Balakrishnan? Yeah.
Vinodh, in the United States, he brought in the best of people to write for him in his book. How did he engage it? Bertrand Russell, Einstein, and Khalil Gibran sits on the board of the newspaper. How did he manage all this? Yes, of course, I find a very short mention, But how did he bring them in? What was his engagement with them?
I think his whole engagement with these people began when he was in the UK. He made friends with H.G. Wells, with Bertrand Russell. He was in his first, when he was first in England, when he went there for his, he actually wanted to do law, but instead he went on to journalism. But at that time, he met people like Sarojini Naidu, Jinnah for the first time there. They were members of the National Liberal Club. So I think the connections first started from there. And then he was part of the women's suffrage movement in the UK. Then he came to the US. And I think the connections continued. Of course, a lot of it, I think, was from his own initiative. But I think his networking was fantastic. And that is something which comes across throughout the book in the very easy way in which he was able to make connections.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you look at that charming personality, that is the thing that is the underlying amongst all these things that we have talked about. He had something that others didn't have, other than his physical attributes. He had also he was liked by most people. I think that was also, even when he was acerbic or he was sarcastic or he was in a tussle with somebody, he never left the propriety of the times. He was very gentlemanly in his conduct. And I think that kind of is something that is makes him very endearing to people who associated with him. And that must be also one of the reasons why, if you see, even when he had a falling out with people, it wasn't something that left a bitter taste. They would be friends, even with people who were not very nice to him. I forget the names now, but some of them who were, I think, in America, especially largely when he was in America, is when he kind of had a lot of experiences with people who were not that very cohesive to his thinking, but he kind of managed to either win them over, or he would never get into any kind of a situation where he would be disliked by them. I think that is there right throughout, right from the beginning. Even his benefactors and the very fact that he got his job, the way he, right from the beginning, when he wanted to apply for something or he wanted to study, he had that. There was something in his own personality that people were, attracted to. And I think that is something that has come out in this book throughout. That he was a person who was very charming. And I think there is a movie in this book, and my only
Like to make,
struggle is only struggle is because the characters that you brought out, Vinod, each one of them, the dialogues. I was just thinking the dialogues would be so sparkling because they have written so much, so you can actually take their words and put it in their own mouth, and so whoever's scripting won't have a problem. And secondly, this is an aspect which Uday said, and I think I strongly believe in it, that if America knows Gandhi, Syud Hussain is responsible largely for that, because if he has traveled from state to state in the US and little known places, if you look at the public speaking that he's done, sometimes to very large audiences and sometimes to very lesser people, not lesser number of people, but he has spoken, he has been the champion of Gandhi's uh, ideology. And I think if at all Gandhiji is known in the US, it's because of Syed Hussain, people like Syed Hussain.
Yeah.
So I think there is.
There's one more question from Bhuvan Lal in Delhi, who says that, Mr. Vinod, thank you for writing this important book. Is there any mention of Lala Hardayal and Gadar Party in US in your book? Which there is. You could tell us about that.
Yes, Mr. Lal. Yes, there is an entire chapter that I have devoted to Hardayal and the Gadar Party. And in fact, this also contains some new material which probably is not known till today. So yes, to answer your question, yes, there is. I'd like to mention one anecdote, which was a sort of a direct consequence of what happened after the publication of the book. As I said when I began my talk, that I found Syed Hussein's stove in a pretty decrepit condition, full of garbage, this, that. Now, Syed Hussein's grandniece, that is his sister's granddaughter, is Princess Sarwat Al Hassan, and she is the Princess of Jordan. She is married to Prince Hassan bin Talal, who is the uncle of the present King Abdullah II. So while I was writing this book, I was in constant touch with Mr. Syed Iqbal Ahmad, who was actually a nephew of Syed Hussain, and who in turn used to keep Princess Sarwat informed of the progress of the book. So after the book was published, she wrote me a very nice letter, and she sort of took it upon herself to make sure that the tomb was sort of cleaned up and brought back to its former glory. And then, of course, I was sent a video where now, of course, the tomb is cleaned up, all the garbage and the whatever. Asked her officials to take up the renovation of the tomb. So this is a direct consequence of what had happened. That at least, the book in a way helped clean up this gentleman's tomb.
So
that's a very you would cherish a kind of association like that. Your
Yeah.
creation has actually helped in not only recognition in about his personality, but his present abode.
Yeah.
In fact, a Foreign Service officer did mention that they had renovated the tomb, or they were renovating it in a review of your book.
Yes.
Which I read. Can I ask one small? What was his interaction with the blacks in the United States? Did you touch on that? I'm just mentioning this because a lot of them were coming and going from India. Like the names I have are Benjamin Mays, Howard Thurman, the philosopher. Benjamin Mays was the president of Morehouse College and the first African-American president of Howard College also. So the Merdeki Johnson. So there were a lot of these people coming and going. Was there an interaction, or were they just part of areas which he didn't touch?
So from whatever I could gather, the association that Syed Hussain formed, which was the National Committee for India's Independence, which was headed by Syed Hussain and which had other members like Anup Singh and Sridharani and Haridas Mazumdar. They had a pretty close interaction with the National Association of Colored People, which was, I believe, at that time headed by Mr. Baldwin. So there is some correspondence which shows the interaction that they had between themselves. They used to organize meetings together, and I think when Vijay Lakshmi Pandit visited the United States, these two organizations did come together to organize or to give Mrs. Pandit a platform for her to speak. So while I don't think they had a convergence of too much of action, there was definitely a convergence of ideas.
Where I have a little doubt is perhaps he did interact with them, because all these people who came to India, all these blacks who came to India, the leaders, and they left, it didn't happen in a vacuum. Somewhere somebody has triggered it off. I'm not sure whether, perhaps we need to dig a little deeper into that.
Yes.
I'm not very sure. Of course, Vinay Lal, the professor of, an authority on Gandhi, as you know, has written a lot on this, about their interactions with Gandhi, etc. But to my mind, it is these Indians who are there who would have facilitated that in some way. I mean, it's not as if it just happened accidentally.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I think we had a really comprehensive, extensive discussion on Syed Hussain, and I'm hoping that it's sort of those who've been listening to us you have every reason now to go and pick up this book and read it. And thank you. Thank you Vinodh, thank you Narayani, thank you Dr. Balakrishnan. I think this has been a lovely afternoon. And anyone else, any concluding remarks, or I think we are done. Thank you, IIC also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And congratulations.